Welcome to Acton Line, a product of the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion and Liberty. I'm Gabriel Jaja, producer. In this episode, Eric Cohn, Acton's Director of Communications, sits down with Dallas Jenkins, Director of The Chosen, an online, multi-season TV series depicting the life of Jesus. Later in this episode, Cohn interviews Jonathan Roumie, the actor who portrays Jesus. The Chosen is the largest crowd-funded media project of all time. According to the Chosen website, Season 2 was fully funded in November 2020. This time, over 100,000 people contributed a total of $10 million. Season 3 is over 90% crowdfunded. This has been achieved completely outside of the Hollywood system, with no plans of ever being sold to a major studio. You can find additional resources in the show notes of this episode, as well as find previous episodes of Acton Line on our website at acton.org/actonline. If you like this program, you can help us reach even more listeners by sharing it with a friend and leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We welcome your comments as well. Acton Line is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify.
Dallas Jenkins, son of celebrated Left Behind author Jerry Jenkins, first produced the independent feature Hometown Legend at the age of 25 and shepherded it to distribution by Warner Brothers. In the nearly 20 years since then, he has directed and produced over a dozen feature and short films for companies such as Universal, Lionsgate, Pureflix, Hallmark Channel, and Amazon. His most recent film, The Resurrection of Gavin Stone, released in theaters in 2017. He is now directing and producing the largest crowd-funded media project of all time, a multi-season series about the life of Christ entitled The Chosen, which we'll be discussing today. Dallas Jenkins, welcome to Acton Line.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate this.
So for the making of The Chosen, I would ask generally, why make this show? I mean, I think in part, the answer to that is obvious, right? To tell this story. But how did you come about wanting to tackle telling the story of Jesus Christ, the life of Jesus, in this serialized way? What inspired you to that?
Well, I did a short film for my church's Christmas Eve service about the birth of Christ from the perspective of the shepherds. It was filmed on my friend's farm in Illinois, 20 minutes from my house. And it was 18 minutes long. And I love the story of Christmas. I love the nativity story from the Gospels. I've heard it 100 times, of course, and have told it many times. But what we decided to do was to tell it from the perspective of the shepherds. And so you see the shepherds that morning, taking the lambs for slaughter to Bethlehem, to the marketplace. And we used cultural context, historical context, all of the things that we knew were taking place during that time, as well as just human interaction, the creativity about what they as human beings would have been doing during that time, and what would it have been like sitting around the campfire on that night that the angels appeared to the shepherds? What would they have been talking about? That kind of stuff. And I felt like in 18 minutes in that short film, I learned more about the nativity and had more of a profound experience than I ever had before. And then when we showed people the short film, the response was overwhelming. It felt this concept of telling the stories we've heard over and over, but from a fresh perspective without changing the character and intentions of Jesus in the Gospels just felt like really a great opportunity and a great way to kind of re-engage and reignite passion for the Gospels. And while I was doing that, I thought, there's been movies and miniseries about the life of Christ. There's never actually been a multi-season show. And the thing about multi-season shows that's unique and that draws me in so much and that makes me want to binge watch or go from season to season is the characters. I want to know, I get to take the time to get to know the characters. The filmmakers get to take the time to set up the moments properly as opposed to rushing it in a 90-minute movie. And so all of that just made me think, boy, that could be an extraordinary opportunity in a multi-season show to really dig into these stories and these people more than has ever been done before. And so that's where the concept of this multi-season idea came from, was just the ability to not have to rush and for you to get to know the people who experience these miracles or even the enemies of Jesus before they encountered Jesus, so that when those moments from the Gospels happen, they're even that much more impactful.
Yeah, I imagine you also feel that you benefit from this golden age of television that we're living in, right? So even you talked about how you have to rush into things in a 90-minute movie. I mean, it also used to be true that in a television series, right, the first episode's the pilot, and you introduce all of the characters very, very quickly. And I think one of the great things about television right now, and about your series as well, is you don't have to tell everything that everyone needs to know about that character right in the very beginning of the show. And you learn organically who these people are, just the way that you actually do in life. When you meet someone, you find a little bit out about them. And the longer you spend time with them, the more you get to know them and then thus identify with them.
That's extraordinarily well said. And it's absolutely true. And it's one of the things that caused people, when they watched the first episode, some people, especially hardcore Christians, were almost confused because they were expecting a traditional Bible story, and they were expecting to know right away who the people were and what Bible verse this particular storyline was from. And in the first episode, we take the time to introduce you to their cultural context, the historical context, their relationships, their needs, their questions, their struggles, all of which isn't in the Bible, but it was real. It happened. Now, maybe not factually all of the specific storylines we chose, but we know that this is a plausible telling of what their lives were like. And so the good news is that once people watched the first episode, it made what happened at the end of the episode, it made what happened later in the season infinitely more impactful than if we had rushed through it. Now, for some people, though, it was a challenge of going, that first episode or first two episodes felt like a slow burn to me because it just took time introducing you to these people. And I just try to remind people, well, that's how every show is. There's a handful of shows that right off the bat, they just put you right in the middle of action, like 24 or Breaking Bad. But most shows take their time and you just kind of get to know the people and even who they are over the course of an episode or two. And that's what we did with The Chosen. So while it might have been different for some people expecting a Bible program, I think from pure storytelling, and for those of us who love, like you said, this golden age of television, I think it was even more profound.
For someone called to make a program like this, how, you have the passion for the project clearly, but how daunting did it seem to you at the outset to tell this story, right? If you look around storytelling culture, whether it be movies or television, especially when you're translating a book into a movie or a TV series, and you can watch, the commentary that goes on about, deviations from the source material and the little things. I just saw Dune, and watching all the conversations around the little changes that you have to make to tell a story like that on a big screen. I mean, you are dealing with, source material that is held with incredible importance for the obvious reason. It's the Bible. It's the story of the life of Jesus Christ. How, I guess in every challenge like that, there's great opportunity. But how did that feel to you at the beginning of coming up with a creative telling and filling those gaps in for the parts that aren't in the text, that connect it as a story?
Yeah, especially as someone and myself who loves the Bible and believes it's God's word and doesn't believe that anything needs to be changed, which is what I think happens a lot of times with certain Bible projects that aren't biblically faithful. They come from a filmmaker who isn't necessarily a believer and is just trying to say something new, say something different for the sake of it. So I remember I was in Israel in 2017 doing research for the show and trying to immerse myself in the places Jesus was, the places he walked, and I'd never been there before. And I remember I was in Magdala, which is Mary Magdalene's birthplace, and I really felt the presence of God, and I felt like God really reached into my heart and laid very powerfully and explicitly on my heart that in several years, when people think of the followers of Jesus, my portrayal is what they're going to think of in terms of the when they read the Gospels, or when they think of have a visual in their mind of Jesus's followers, they're going to picture the people from The Chosen. And I'm not going to let you screw it up. Now, I don't know I'm not going to write in stone that was God's voice. Who can ever know for sure? I feel confident because, of course, what he said proved to be true, which is that within a couple of years now, people say all over the world that when they're reading the Bible or when they're thinking of Jesus's followers, the picture they have in their head is that of the chosen, which previously Jesus's followers didn't have kind of a visual identity. There wasn't a kind of a distinctive movie that you thought of or a portrayal or that came to your mind when you thought of Simon Peter or Mary Magdalene. So the reason I'm sharing all this with you is because that in many ways, it took some pressure off. I of course feel the weight to get it right. I of course want every single thing that I do in the show to be plausible. If not factual, I want it to be plausible and to capture the character and intentions of Jesus in the Gospels. I never want to violate that. But I can't worry about the audience reaction. I can't worry about offending people. I mean, every day I'm publicly accused of being a blasphemer or, a liar or, I'm violating scripture or something like that. People do videos about it. And also every day I'm told that the chosen changed their life and they think I'm the greatest. And neither one of those things can motivate me. I can't think about any of them when I'm sitting in front of a blank page. So I don't feel pressure to get it right for the sake of the audience. I feel pressure to get it right for the sake of God and making sure that I'm honoring Jesus's life and his followers and even his enemies. I feel like I want, when I get to heaven, these people to say, thank you. You honored us. That's not the outfit that I wore, but you were close. And so that would be amazing. And that's what motivates me, not worrying about audience reaction.
Can you tell me about the creative process for putting these episodes together? Because one of the things that has struck me is when you read the Bible, you think about these people as these characters in a story, but you may not connect with them on as clear of a human level, right? Because as we just mentioned, you're filling in gaps in between the actual Bible verses in terms of conversations that these people may have had. And one of the things that's really struck me about the series is how believable the dialogue is, and something just as a fan of entertainment, television shows and movies, how quickly bad dialogue and not believable dialogue can take you out of a story because you think in your mind nobody talks to each other like that. And one of the things that struck me about the series is the conversations are believable, the emotions are believable, the motivations are believable. So tell me about that creative process to really get in the minds of the people whose story you're telling that are also people that, their names that all over the world people are familiar with.
Yeah, I mean that's the whole thing. That's the secret sauce. That's what's literally was written on the wall on a whiteboard. When my co-writers and I first gathered to plot out the show and come up with who the main characters are. And we even wrote, what are the chosen rules? And the first and foremost was we err on the side of the human and the real. Authenticity is our number one trait that we pursue, both in the show and in my relationship with the fans and our live streams and all of that. So as we're writing, I'm, even like just for speaking for myself, when I'm writing on my laptop dialogue scene, I'm saying it out loud and I'm saying, how does this sound? Does this sound like a human being? I think it's more important for this show than almost any show that I've ever been a part of or any show that I watch, because if we don't get that right, then the purpose of the show is lost. So some shows, the purpose isn't about kind of reintroducing you to humanity. Some shows are very, the dialogue is beautiful, but it's Shakespearean or it's melodramatic. Or if you think of like Aaron Sorkin's writing, I don't know that that's always necessarily realistic unless every single person in the country had an IQ of 150 and had a command of history and could talk rapid fire.
Aaron Sorkin's dialogue to me is always, it's the things that you wish you would have said in the moment that you think of afterwards, but nobody ever thinks of in the moment.
Yeah. And it's brilliant. I mean, Aaron Sorkin is a transcendent genius, but the purpose of The Chosen is to correct and overcome the hurdles of how we typically approach the stories of Jesus. It's typically formal. It's typically, visually it's on a stained glass window or a statue or a painting. Or it's when you're reading it, even the purposes of the Gospels were not to capture authentic human dialogue. The purpose of the Gospels were to give Jesus his greatest hits so that you believe that Jesus was the Son of God, to prove that he was the Son of God. So they're writing kind of Jesus's main teachings, and there's very few kind of natural, human, authentic. I don't want to say, of course, they're all authentic, but I mean, they're natural human conversations. You never even see a greeting. You don't even see anyone saying hi, or asking, how's it going today? I mean, none of that's in the Gospels. That wasn't the purpose. So my approach, I want you to approach the show and to have an experience with the show for the express purpose of believing this really happened. These were real people. Jesus himself was a human being. He laughed with his friends. He danced at weddings. He, dressed his own wound. He made his own food. All of these things that he experienced, that is a very, very important part of the show. And because the genre of this show is so usually different. So that's why we spend so much time on getting it real. And that's why we even have scenes that sometimes don't even drive the plot. They're just so you get to know the characters better, so that when they experience these gospel moments, it feels even more relatable.
Talk to me about the beginning part of the making of the show, of course, and for anyone who follows, Hollywood movies or television, is financing. And one of the unique things about your show is that it is crowd-funded. When you had the calling to make this program, did you think initially that was the route that you would go in order to finance the program? Or was it approach it through the normal way that television shows and movies often get made, through studios and with that kind of funding? Was that ever on the table, or was this, revolution that we've had in the way that individual people can invest in ideas like this the first thing that was on your mind?
No, it was not the first thing on my mind. I never thought it was going to work. When I had the idea for the show, I did think to myself, whatever streaming platform or network, if one of them committed to doing this, it would, if I accomplished a good show, if I made a good show, if this show turned out high quality, I did believe it. If, for example, if it was on Netflix, it would be huge. But I didn't think that was going to happen. So it was just like, if someone decided to make this on a big platform, I think people would love to see it. But it was such a non likely thing. I mean, it was just, I was coming off of a big career failure. My movie had bombed at the box office. I didn't know if I had a future in this business. I didn't care if I did or not. I was just focused on doing what God wanted me to do. And I was working on this short film for my church. When a mutual friend of a streaming platform, this very small streaming platform, a mutual friend got my short film in their hands, and they said, we want to raise the money through crowdfunding. I thought it was ridiculous. And I didn't think it was going to work. And worst case scenario, it doesn't work. And maybe I have a chance to present it to a streaming platform at some point. But I don't know. I wasn't thinking ahead, really. But I just thought, all right, well, can't hurt to try. Let's see what happens. And then, of course, it ended up shattering the all-time crowdfunding record for media projects. And people just went crazy for it. And all based on this little short film I did for my church. And then we just put out on social media. So from the beginning, this whole thing has been what we call impossible math. Something that we believe God said to my wife, early on, is I do impossible math. We didn't know what it meant at the time. And it's just proven over and over again, not only in the crowdfunding, but then once we decided to make the show free, the day that we made the show completely free, we quadrupled our income. None of that makes sense. I'm just along for the ride.
What did you feel also freed creatively by that means of funding the program, right? So, if you're funded in a more traditional way, you've got the studio heads and people higher up who want to, everybody who's a fan of movies knows of at least one movie they love that they know the studio execs got involved and they mucked something up because they got involved. but because you've got investors who on an individual level have put their money in it because they believe in your vision for it, how freeing creatively is that to you?
Yeah, that was one of the attractive things about the idea, even though I didn't think the idea would work. One of the things we said to potential investors, because that's what this was. This wasn't a donation for season one. It was actual investment. And then what we say to people who pay it forward, because the show is free now. And when they pay it forward to allow it to remain free and to allow us to finance future episodes and seasons, it's not an investment anymore for them. It's just literally a contribution that they're doing just as their optional payment. I say, this gives us freedom. You can now trust or put your faith in, or know that this is in my hands, that I don't answer to studio execs who might not believe what you believe and who might have a different motivation for doing the show. So that's why we do so much behind the scenes stuff, and why I'm doing live streams all the time, and why I talk to the viewers, on a near daily basis, because I want them to trust and know that we have the creative freedom to be faithful to the text and to make sure that this is done right. One of the things I said was, Hollywood's golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. And we want to make our own rules with this show so that we're not, we can't be canceled. We can't be forced to change something just to appease a certain group of people. And that is a huge, I think, not only gift to me, but I think the fan, it's one of the huge reasons the fans trust the show.
As a believing Christian, obviously this is a story that you're familiar with because it is, it's the word of God. It is your faith written down. As you've been through the process of making this show, is there any part of the story that you've come to have a greater appreciation for or understanding of through the process of translating it from gospel verse into television show?
Yeah, for sure. The intimacy of Jesus is what's really hit me harder than anything. And my wife, who's primarily responsible for our extra content, like our Bible studies and devotional books and children's books, as we really feel responsible for what we're sharing with readers and viewers of the show, is that Jesus was a God of the intimate and the personal. He wasn't just getting up on stage doing magic tricks for thousands of people to impress everybody. He was meeting people where they were at. He was Emmanuel, God with us. He was experiencing what we were experiencing. But every miracle that we portray in the show, and every encounter that Jesus has when he calls people to follow him, we believe that he tailored it to their individual needs. And we believe that's still true today, that the God of the universe wants a personal relationship with you within the context of how he created you, that there's not just some statue or church organization that you have to aspire to be allowed into, or you don't necessarily have to approach yourself and try to achieve something to get there. He's coming to you. And he's coming to you with the knowledge of who you are specifically. And that's what he did when he was here. And that's what we're trying to portray in the show.
So when this episode of our podcast comes out, it'll be 2 interviews in one episode, because we're also going to talk to Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus. So I want to ask you, and I'll ask a similar question to him, the kind of inverse of the question to him. When you're casting for a television show, like finding the right people to play the characters in the show is incredibly important. And boy, I can't imagine a bigger casting decision for a show than casting who will play Jesus Christ. Can you talk about Jonathan and talk about the choice of Jonathan for this role?
Yeah, so Jonathan was actually the easiest casting choice we made, and the quickest, because I'd actually worked with Jonathan before on portraying Jesus. That decision was made on a much smaller scale with much smaller stakes 7 or 8 years ago, when I was doing a short film for my church's Good Friday service about the crucifixion, but it was from the perspective of the 2 thieves. And so I was casting the 2 thieves who took up the bulk of the screen time. And Jonathan auditioned for one of the thieves and did a great job, but there were 2 other guys that I thought were better for the roles. And all of the people who were auditioning for Jesus were were just not great at all. And I'm like, well, I do need, even though Jesus is only on screen for a few minutes, I do need to get this right. And I thought Jonathan did a really good, audition. I'd be curious how he does as Jesus. And within 10 seconds of his audition, I just thought, oh my goodness. I mean, this is, and I'm sure you experienced this when you watch the show. It really does have this almost transcendent experience. I mean, portrayal. I don't know. Part of it's, I mean, he's a brilliant actor, so I don't want to take that away from him, of course. But there also does seem to be something more happening, that God has just kind of anointed this portrayal. And then when we were filming it, I was watching it, when he was on the cross, and I just thought, this is the best portrayal of Jesus I've ever seen. And it's just a couple minutes. And so we started doing that more. Every year I would do short films or vignettes for my church, and always brought Jonathan back for it. And that gave us a lot of time to kind of explore what we wanted to do with the character, as it were, and what we were trying to tell people about Jesus. And so that when it came time to have the opportunity to do the show, he was the first person cast and the easiest decision made.
Tell me about the reactions that you've gotten from fans of the show. I mean, I'm sure you talk to the people who've watched the show. You get feedback on that. What has that been like? What has surprised you the most in the feedback that you've gotten from people who've watched the program?
The most surprising thing, I think, would be the walls that have broken down in the audiences who watched the show. So I honestly didn't have any expectations for anything. I mean, I really am in a place in my life, spiritually and professionally, where I just don't make predictions. I don't expect much. But I will say that if you would have asked me at the time to predict something, I wouldn't have predicted that children would like the show. Teenagers, I hope teenagers would like it, because I thought it was far more relatable than most Bible projects that I'd seen. But I didn't expect kids as young as 6, 7, and 8 years old to be binge watching the show. That's been a shock. I didn't expect Catholics and LDS folks and Greek Orthodox and to love the show as much as evangelicals love the show, because I'm an evangelical. And so the show comes from that lens. Now, when you focus on the stories of Jesus, you find there's actually not a ton of difference of opinion about Jesus and these stories of the Gospels. The theological differences seem to come after Jesus was here. But I think the biggest difference is probably our viewpoint on Mary. But I guess I just didn't expect this much passion from other faith traditions that I'm not a part of, and how this show seems to have broken down those walls. And it also seems to be breaking through cultural differences and walls. People in third world countries, people in countries that just are very different culturally from America and from my culture and my faith background, something is happening where it's just piercing through that wall, and they're just having an experience with the show that's extraordinary. And it's actually what is easy. It reminds me, and it's easy to remember that I'm not this good, that God's doing something bigger than I'm capable of with the show. And that's just been fun to watch.
For people in positions in entertainment who may be watching this phenomenon, what do you think it reveals about the market that exists out there for not only explicitly Christian programming like this, but also just programming that more faithfully and honestly and realistically represents people of religious faith? I mean, we could point to plenty of examples in popular culture where, you have the clearly typecasted Christian character within a TV show or a movie that just is not representative of the people that you know. It's not representative of the people that I know. It's a bad caricature. And just I would say that from my observance of it, that seems to be a perspective that you can point to obvious examples like the Passion of the Christ, where people didn't think that it would be able to succeed. And you have people like you and like Mel Gibson in that instance who have difficult times. You had thankfully to the internet had an entirely different way of financing a project like this. But I know of other people who want to tell those kinds of stories, right, that run up against the idea that people seem to think like this will never work. And you have these clear examples of, well, it does. So what do you think this reveals about the market, the appetite for storytelling that's either explicitly Christian, like in this case, or just a more honest representation of people of faith and faith in our lives?
Well, I think the answer is in many ways in the question, which is that when you're authentic in your portrayal, that it resonates so much more. And I think that both Christians and non-Christians have not always done a good job at this. So you've got Christians telling stories about their faith that are oftentimes glossing over reality, glossing over the experiences before their encounters with Jesus, trying to be safe, trying to, especially in Bible projects, sometimes you've got it where you're trying so hard to be safe and careful that it just doesn't even feel like a real show or a real portrayal. And then you've got the opposite side where it's, maybe some executives or filmmakers who aren't believers and they're trying to make a statement about something, they're trying to change something, or they're portraying what they believe Christians are. And neither side gets it right most of the time. But when you are authentic and you are trying to tell the truth artistically and accurately as much as possible, seems to be that it brings out an audience that is desperate for it, and they become true evangelists for it. I mean, the Chosen isn't the only example of this, but it's currently proving this point, which is that you can reach a wide audience when they believe that you are being authentic to their lives and to the portrayal of the people that they love, or in the case of Jesus, worship. And they not only are happy to support it, they become frantic about it. I mean, it's like water in a parched land for them. And so I wish it wasn't as rare as it is. And I think my doing the show is in many ways a response to that. I think I'm not seeing this enough, therefore I want to try to do it. And I didn't know that it would have this kind of response, but I thought if nothing else, it's something that I really would want to watch and I would be passionate about. And it seems to be resonating.
Dallas, final question, and probably the most important one. How and where can people watch The Chosen?
Yes, I would say that's the first step in having this experience. Well, The Chosen is on its own app. It's also on a website. So you can either go to thechosen.tv, www.thechosen.tv, or you just download the app in wherever you get your apps for your phone. Now, you might be thinking, I don't want to watch the show on my phone. And I agree with you. I don't either. So our partners invented this technology that allows you to cast directly to your streaming device. So you download the Chosen app. It's free and easy. Doesn't even require an email address. You can go to your Roku, your Apple TV, your Fire Stick, your Chromecast. You can go to someone else's streaming devices and connect directly to them and watch it free and easy. It doesn't require a sign up. It doesn't require a dime. It doesn't require an email address, like I said. So it's actually quite free and easy to watch. And so if you haven't seen it yet, that's how you do it.
Dallas Jenkins is the director and producer of the largest crowdfunded media project of all time, the multi-season series about the life of Jesus Christ entitled The Chosen. Dallas Jenkins, thank you so much for joining us today on Act in Line.
No, I'm so glad to have been with you, and I love what you guys do.
Jonathan Roumie is an actor, director, producer, and speaker, best known for his award-winning role as Jesus in the groundbreaking series and global sensation, The Chosen. He has also appeared in several internationally watched network and cable TV series, including Chicago Med, The Mindy Project, The Good Wife, The Newsroom, Law & Order, and the NCIS franchise, among others. Jonathan also serves as strategic advisor to Hallow, one of the largest prayer and meditation apps in the world, and serves as VP on the board of two nonprofit entertainment media companies. Jonathan has been featured on Fox News, EWTN, and CBN, as well as The Hollywood Reporter, Film Threat, The Christian Post, and many more. He reaches a combined social media following of over 250,000 followers. Jonathan Roumie, welcome to Act in Line.
Thank you, Eric. Great to be here.
My first question for you is, tell me about how you came to be involved with this project, The Chosen.
Yes. So almost next spring, it will be 8 years that I first met Dallas Jenkins, the creator of The Chosen. I got cast here in Los Angeles to play Jesus in a short film that he was doing for his church's Easter service, his Good Friday service film, or the Good Friday. They have a Good Friday service, and then at that service, you have a bunch of different forms of worship and media and people singing, and then they would show his film. And the name of the film is called The Two Thieves, and I played Jesus in this story about the two thieves that are crucified along either side of Christ. And it's sort of an origin story as to how they ended up there. Very much in the vein of what people have come to know from the extra biblical approach to The Chosen, and the stuff that's not quite written about in scriptures, but through, scriptural inference and, historical probability, it became a very plausible scenario as to who those guys could have been and why they were there. So that's how I first met Dallas. And then we did 2 more projects for his church's Easter service over the next 3 years. And then about a year and a half after that, he called me up and asked me if I wanted to play Jesus in this, what would be this 4-episode at the time series, with hopes of making more episodes. And of course, I just said, yeah, when do I put on the sandals again?
Tell me a little about your career as an actor prior to doing this show.
So before the show, I had first started working in the area of voiceover in animation 20 years prior, actually, to the year. The first job I ever did was for a TV show for MTV called Celebrity Deathmatch, where these clay celebrities would, fight each other to the death in a ring. This claymation, and it was kind of a cult hit for MTV, and went for several seasons, and then got canceled, and then got resuscitated a couple of times more. But yeah, so that's how I first started, and then I did a bunch of commercials in New York City, which is where I'm from, and where I recorded Celebrity Deathmatch. And then I started getting into films, all while I was working as a location scout in the film industry in New York. And then right around the time of the financial collapse, I made the decision to move to Los Angeles and to see if I could give this thing a go full time, as it were, and moved out in 2010, and essentially started from scratch and tried to build my relationships one at a time, and do my small little bit parts in TV shows that became bigger parts in TV shows, and variety of network shows to cable stuff and or streaming like for Hulu. I still did a lot of voiceover. I still do voiceover now. Currently, it's when I'm not filming on camera, I'm usually working in voiceover. Small parts and decent sized films and plays. I did a bunch of plays here in Los Angeles. And I feel like I pretty well paid my dues coming into The Chosen. So
how do you go about, as an actor, preparing to play a role in general, but going about preparing to play Jesus Christ in a show like The Chosen? What does that process look like for you? Well,
playing Jesus Christ in any of the instances that I have had the opportunity to do that previously is unlike any other approach to any other character that I've played. In that, I mean, technically, from a craft perspective, I don't approach them the same. With Jesus, my process really begins with prayer. I pray an awful lot about how to approach the role, how to interpret the scenes that we're filming, and ask for guidance and for the Holy Spirit to kind of be with me on the day and to show up and inspire me in a way that I couldn't inspire myself or derive any human sort of inspiration. And I mostly try to stay out of the way of that performance. I try to mostly just let whatever bit of my humanity God wishes to use in the role. I kind of start with that. everything else is kind of up to him. Other characters, I'm preparing for a movie now where also a historical character lived in the 60s and the 70s. And so there's pictures of him, there's reference of him, there's video of him. So I'm going through that stuff and kind of seeing the way he speaks and trying to analyze what part of him is the essentially the genesis of how his character should sound, coming through my interpretation of it, how he moved. Sometimes you use things like clothes and jewelry and stuff like that when you put it on, or you grow out your hair, which I'm growing out more now. It sort of just gives you a different feel and it makes you behave differently. So every character is different. But with Jesus, it's yes, there's an accent that I employ. But other than that, and the costume, I try to keep it really, really simple. And I think it's people have responded to that. So I guess I'm hopefully in the right vein of what God wants me to be doing with this role.
Yeah,
and the writing is great. So I mean that when you have great writing, it makes your job so much easier. And this is, I mean, obviously being inspired by the greatest story ever told. Dallas and Ryan and Tyler, who collectively write the series, are phenomenal writers. And Dallas is a great director.
Yeah, one of the things that strikes me about the show in watching it, and I talked to Dallas about this as well, is how believable the characters are and how it adds such a third dimension to stories that we know so well. And there's the bridge material, right? Because you're developing characters as the show goes along by showing conversations that aren't, in the gospel, but nonetheless, right, we're imagining the kind of conversations that might have taken place. And what strikes me about the show is how believable the conversations and the dialogue and the characters are. In your work in the craft of acting, how do you think about that kind of, you've got the source material and then translating it into what, in my opinion, is such a believable and thus the kind of performance and story that I think you really can connect with?
I think, bringing the vernacular into the modern day, while for some people it has been kind of unexpected and jarring, overwhelmingly people have seen it as an opportunity to connect and to see themselves in the stories of the apostles and their encounters with Jesus, thus allowing us as viewers to say, wow, maybe this is the relationship that I can have with Jesus. Maybe this is how he would see me and what he might say to me if he were here today in the 21st century. And I think that's important. I think when you think about biblical translations, like, when you go to the King James version and try to, read that translation of the Bible, it was very, very different, but people spoke very differently. Their understanding of English was very, very different from ours. And through the evolution of time and history and language, we're trying to find the most relevant and relatable language that people today can be affected by when hearing these stories that are timeless. So, I would just think of it as a very modern take, a translation of these ancient stories, but not in a way that feels incongruous to what was happening. It feels, I don't know why it feels relatable, but it just happens to make these stories much more accessible when we've modernized it in that way.
Through playing this role and being on this program, has there been any particular part of the gospel story that you have connected with in a different way by being involved in portraying it in a visual medium like for television?
I think just having fresh perspectives on the apostles, the disciples, knowing that there's so much that we can identify with. Like, for instance, Thomas is somebody that I identify with a lot, not where we currently have him in the story in the series, but where he gets to after the crucifixion, before and after the crucifixion. And there's a phrase that comes to mind for me: I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. And I think it's something where, especially when we talk about miracles and needing to see God working in our lives, and myself included, especially 3 months or so prior to being cast in The Chosen, having God turn my own life around in a very obvious, miraculous, for lack of a better term, way. It's even having seen God's providence, and even reading about the disciples being witnesses to Jesus's miracles, and just, the whole history of the Jewish people. God would do these great things, and then a few years later, they would forget that he did these things, and they would lose faith. And then he would do something greater, and then they would be like, it's like this memory amnesia like sets in, and it's like we kind of need this constant reminder for ourselves. Unfortunately, that God is who he says he is, and he does these things, and yet we still forget and act so fallibly human, and are in need of his compassion and mercy, because we take a lot for granted, even after he's shown us his great power and providence, and I can especially relate to that, and needing to have more faith is something that I'm always asking for. I don't know if that answers your question, but
well, I think that's good. You mentioned in there an experience of God having an effect in your life 3 months before being cast in this. Would you be willing to share something about that?
Sure. I'd be happy to. And funny enough, I had the opportunity when I was in Rome this summer, speaking at the Acton Institute, to share this story with many people, with a smaller audience there. So a few more people might get to hear this, but I had moved to Los Angeles 8 years prior to this moment in May of 2018, and just found myself struggling. Found myself trying to juggle 6 or 7 different side hustles, and I couldn't get anything to stick with any sort of consistency, and I couldn't figure out why. And I had been prayerful and faithful and constantly asking God to, take this desire to act away from me if this wasn't what he wanted me to do, which was what I had kind of surmised at that point, because I wasn't making a consistent living at it. I was getting jobs here and there, but I was still struggling. And I got to the point in 2018 where I woke up one morning on a Saturday, $100 overdrafted. I had $20 in my pocket. I had enough food to last literally to the end of the day. And I had a mountain of bills coming due that following week and beyond. And I hadn't worked in 2 or 3 weeks, so I had no ostensible income showing up in the mail in any time in the near future. And I didn't know what to do. I was literally at my wit's end, and I didn't have anywhere else to go except on my knees in front of a crucifix, where I poured out my heart to God, and just, I entreated upon him, and I pleaded, and I just, I was just beside myself, wondering how it had got to this point. And, I literally, this is I vocalized this entire conversation. I said, Lord, I've been asking for years to take this away. If you think there's something else that I should be doing, but you never have, you've been silent, and I don't understand why. And, I thought the Lord helps those who help themselves. And then I realized 3 years later, well, that's not actually in the Bible. It's more like the Lord helps those who rely on him and ask for his help and cry out for his help in the way that I was that day. And then I started throwing back scripture, and I said, you said, come to me all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give your souls rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden's light. And I said, you know what, God, take mine. There you go, Jesus. Have some of my burden, because I'm out. I'm tapping out. I surrender. I have nowhere else to go. And so now I'm going to give it to you, and you have to show me where to go in order for me to survive, because there's no other way for me to do this. So I'm going to give it to you. And I surrendered. And I left my house that morning. Probably took a walk around the block, maybe spent some of the money that I had left on breakfast, and came back in the early part of the afternoon and went to the mailbox. And in the mail, there were 4 checks in the box, just sitting there. And I was staring at the mailbox, and I said, what is that? And I took it out, and it was clearly 4 checks. And I was so shocked that I went upstairs to my apartment. I sat on the bed, and I put my phone on the bed and turned on my camera function. And I decided to memorialize this moment for a couple of reasons. Number one, to make sure that I wasn't delusional. And number two, for posterity, to have proof that God was clearly doing something that moment in my life. And I pressed record. And I opened the checks, and each one of them was bigger than the one before. And they were from these disparate sources of income that I had. Like, one of them, I think, was a TV show that I had done years ago. And through the residual payment system through the union, you would get like a little bits of money here and there every 3 to 6 months. Well, I think one of these companies hadn't paid me anything in like 5 years. And they're like, oh, we forgot to pay you. Here's a check, And I was floored. And I just wept as I opened these checks and realized how powerful God really was in my life at that time, how much he actually had me taken care of, how much he was looking after me, and needed me to drive myself to the point where all I could do, all I had left, was to rely on him and his goodness and his promise. And when I finally handed over the reins, when I finally let go and allowed him into my career, I had allowed him into other parts of my life, but when it came to my career, I figured I knew what was best, because I was the actor living in Hollywood, in Los Angeles. I knew what to do. I didn't, I wouldn't bother God with the details on that. So, but that's, he's probably, I should have relied on him from the get-go, but I feel that in hindsight, he needed to bring me to that place so that I would have no other ways or people or options or avenues to go down other than to choose him and to completely surrender myself to him. And when I did, he showed up in a way that defies logic. And from that point on, I've never stressed about finances or work in the same way. And then 3 months later, Dallas called me and says, hey, I think we're going to be doing a series. You want to put the sandals back on? So I said, absolutely. And I still struggled. It didn't stop struggling. Surrender doesn't mean you just don't have any problems. It means when you do have the problems, you know where to go, and you know who's going to help you take care of them. And and so that's been my approach ever since. And now I'm traveling around the world talking about this experience and talking to people about Jesus and meeting people whose lives have been changed or saved in one person. And I don't mean that just spiritually. I mean physically, people that were on the verge of committing suicide had encountered Christ through this show and decided not to kill themselves and live to tell about it to myself and to Dallas like a year later, saying this show saved my life, quite literally. So it's been profound, and nothing I ever do will compare to the impact that the show's having.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What does the success of this show and the way that it is connected with so many people, you're living in Los Angeles, working in Hollywood, what does it tell you about the market that exists out there for entertainment like this that I think generally gets dismissed and by mainstream Hollywood, that they think they're that you don't see a lot of productions like this, and it's amazing the crowdfunding story that we talked to Dallas about. What does it tell us about the market for entertainment like this?
Well, I think people are hungry for this kind of entertainment, but the difference is, and people should dismiss most of it because most of it is terrible. Most Christian media is not made with a level of quality or craftsmanship that is comparable to what Hollywood does to approach the craft of storytelling and movie making. And why shouldn't we? Why don't we do that? What is the problem? How have we not sunk more resources into making sure that we get the best writers, get the best directors, the best actors to tell these stories? I mean, it's like you're doing God a disservice when you're doing any less than what is the absolute best when telling his story, or even modern day versions of his story, whatever it is. If you are making films and TV shows in the faith-based field, you cannot sacrifice the media or medium for the message, because the people will never get the message if the medium is unwatchable. If it is terrible, if it is just if you're sending a check in an envelope that is, was dipped in the gutter before you mailed it, nobody's going to open that check, that envelope, even if it has $1 million check in it. It's like they're not even they don't want to know what's in it, even if it can change their lives, because it just looks terrible. It sounds terrible. Or it's preaching in a way that people feel judged. They feel, that their lives are not worthy of what the message is in whatever the film is that they're watching, that says, hey, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. And, so get it together. And most people they don't learn that way. They don't change by being condescended to or basically told how terrible they are, or some version of that mantra. So what we're trying to do is what we're doing in just simply telling this story about these people and not about this man who changed the world, is something that I think so many people, and especially critics, have found refreshing. And there was an article in the Atlantic, which is not necessarily where you would expect to find an article about The Chosen, saying this is a show that you're not watching, and here's why you should watch it. And I think it was a Christian reviewer that says, I'm a reviewer for this kind of material, and I hate most of it, and this is why you need to be watching the show. So I think when we pay more attention to improving the levels of quality with the stories that we're telling, and take into account the savvy of today's audience, and especially the cynicism of the modern secular audience, we need to be able to tell stories in a way that appeal to everyone, not just the people who are already on board. Because if we're trying to spread the name of Jesus to everyone on the planet, and there's people that don't want to hear it, well, how are you going to get them to even want to sit down and watch the story? So you got to meet people where they're at. And I think that's what Jesus did.
Jonathan Roumie is an actor, director, producer, and speaker, and best known for his award-winning role as Jesus in the groundbreaking series and global sensation, The Chosen. Thank you so much for joining us today on Act in Line.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. God bless.
As always, thank you for listening. Our team loves putting this podcast together for you. It's encouraging to hear from our listeners. Feedback is incredibly important to us because it lets us know what you'd like to hear more of, including the kinds of topics you're interested in most. If you have comments, feedback, or ideas for a show topic or interesting guest, you can email our team at producer@acton.org. Until next week, for Act in Line, I'm Gabriel Jaja.